Right. Good evening, everyone. I want to welcome you to tonight's VETgirl YouTube live event. Very, very excited to be talking about Lyme disease. As we all know, it's one of those diseases that just seems to have this crazy cloud. It's like an enigma. We can't get enough information about Lyme. So I'm super excited to have Dr. Duncan here with us, and we're going to be talking about Lyme. But if you have attended a YouTube live event with VETgirl before, we first want to know where you are. Now, my name is Garrett Pachtinger. I'm a critical care specialist and the co-founder of VETgirl. I am logging in from thankfully not rainy Pennsylvania anymore. It's been a tough week here, lots of rain, but glad to at least be drying off. Justine, where are you logging in from? Uh-oh. Justine, can you hear us?
I can. Can you hear me?
Yeah, where are you logging in from?
I'm logging in from Minneapolis, and it was about 35 degrees this morning, but it's warming up to 65 degrees tomorrow, so I can't complain too much. And I'm so excited. I'm seeing some of our friends from Portugal, where it's got to be like 4 a.m. So love that people are tuning in from everywhere, from Canada, all over the world. So thank you, everyone, for tuning in tonight.
I did warn Dr. Duncan that we get our international viewers, and Portugal was one of our big ones. With that said, Dr. Duncan, where are you logging in from?
Hey, everybody. So I live in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, so pretty much in the center of the United States. And I will say that spring has officially sprung. My allergies are raging. It's warm. I'm excited for summer. I'm getting antsy. So it's great to be here with you guys.
Awesome. Well, thank you again so much for being here. And we love to know where our attendees, our audience is logging in from. I'm looking at my screen now. We have, let's see here, St. Paul, right near Justine, Seattle, Cincinnati, Ohio, Michigan, Portugal, Minnesota, New York, Florida, Los Angeles, another PA person.
Trinidad, one of my favorite Caribbean islands with amazing shark bait sandwiches. No real shark sandwiches, though.
See here else. New Hampshire on vacation. Normally, let's see here, Texas. So the list goes on. So please continue to type in. It makes us super happy to see our friends from all around the world. And thank you so much for taking the time to be with us. Let's go ahead and get this YouTube live party started. First of all, thank you so much to Merck Animal Health. As you all know, when we have the fortune, the benefit of an amazing educational partner like Merck Animal Health, we're super excited to be able to provide this event free to the veterinary world. So thank you so much to Merck Animal Health for all you do for education and Lyme disease with prevention. So we appreciate you being here with us tonight. Super important. So this is a race-approved event. How are you going to get your CE? Very, very important. There are two ways to get your CE. You can either use your fancy phone and take that QR code using your camera, which will open up to our registration form, or type in that URL. Justine will put it in the chat, but it is tinyurl.com/VG for VETgirl 5123, which is today's date. Very, very, very important when you do that to please register with the email that is associated with your VETgirl account. If you don't have a VETgirl account, please sign up for at minimum a basic account, no credit card needed. But this, what it does is it gives you an account on our platform. So when we upload our attendee list, it automatically puts your CE certificate directly in your VETgirl account. So you don't have to worry about losing it in your email or losing it in your desk drawer, or wherever it may be. So please either use that QR code or type in that link to your browser, fill out that registration form, and use your VETgirl email, the email associated with your VETgirl account. That's the only way to get your CE certificate. This form will be open for the next hour, means we won't close it until 9 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. Central. So you have 30 minutes during the webinar and 30 minutes after the webinar. We will put this link in the chat now, and I will come back to this slide later today. Because this is a YouTube live, we know those often YouTube screens are a little bit small. Please know you can maximize it using that bottom button in the bottom right. That if you click that, it will make it your full screen, a little easier to see us and the slides. We hope you are, if not already a VETgirl member, we hope you know about all the things that we offer. YouTube live events such as this, webinars, podcasts, blogs, rounds, short educational videos, CE management. You can keep all of your CE certificates with us, and we certainly hope you're enjoying our certificate programs. We now have 10 certificate programs, as you see on the screen, that are absolutely part of your VETgirl membership. So please make sure you investigate. We actually just launched our new VETgirl Elite trial membership, which gives you 14-day access to watch anything you want, to really get a taste of what we do if you're not already a VETgirl member. And we certainly hope you love what you do and you decide to become a VETgirl member, either individually or as part of a hospital team, because you all, your whole hospital, you all love us so much. Also, VETgirl U, we hope you're going to join us out in sunny, beautiful Arizona at the Fairmont Scottsdale Princess. It is a beautiful resort. We have a dental lab the day before, only 4 spots left in that. Otherwise, it will be sold out. And we're about 75% sold out on our conference. So please, if you're thinking about it, if you're on the fence, you don't want to have FOMO, that fear of missing out, please go ahead, sign up for VETgirl U, because we would love to see you in Arizona. And I promise you'll love the resort. It is absolutely a beautiful place. With that said, I'd love to stop talking and give you the person who you want to hear, Dr. Kathryn Duncan. Dr. Duncan, thank you so much for being here with us today. We know you're out in Oklahoma, the middle of the country, but we'd love to know a little bit more about you. What do you love studying, teaching, practicing? And then we'd love to hear what you know about Lyme to help us be better in diagnosing, treating, and preventing Lyme. So please go ahead. The floor is yours. And thank you so much for being here with us tonight.
Thank you guys so much. It's really an honor and a pleasure to be here. So, I am in Oklahoma City because I just finished my residency at Oklahoma State University. I've mostly studied ticks and tick-borne diseases, as well as other vector-borne diseases. I am now a professional service veterinarian for Merck Animal Health. I specialize in parasitology and I'm board certified. So, that is mostly what I get to talk about all day, which I do enjoy a lot, which I hope you'll see. But I'm also an adjunct assistant professor at Oklahoma State University. And so I did stay on to be able to help with teaching and still interact with those students and the graduate students in research, because I do love that and I couldn't give it up. So, today on our Lyme talk, I'm hoping that whether this is your first or your second Lyme talk, or maybe even your 10th, that I am combining recent research as well as some of the highlights from that ACVIM consensus statement released in 2016, so that you can walk away with something you didn't used to know about Lyme. So, we're going to start with a brief overview and then we will go into a case to be able to talk about diagnostics and treatment a little bit more. So, in the United States, canines can be infected with Borrelia burgdorferi, the causative agent of Lyme disease, which is transmitted by Ixodes species ticks, but humans can also be infected and develop disease. They've had studies that have shown maybe other hosts as well can become infected, but the disease is less well understood. So, we have organizations such as the Companion Animal Parasite Council. It's an incredible resource. It's one that I love to use in clinic because it can be interactive. So this is one of those maps. You can click on a state to go down even further and see county level data. They take data from IDEXX and Antech laboratories, they combine it, and they give this data to us quite regularly. So this map was actually accessed and a screenshot was taken just in February 2023. And nationally, 1 in 20 dogs are testing positive for Borrelia. And what we're testing for is antibodies. So that reaction to being infected with Borrelia. And you can see the darker the orange color, the more dogs that are seropositive in that state. So really restricted in that northeastern, upper Midwestern areas, but it's definitely spreading. So I grew up in Tennessee. Lyme disease was never something I really worried about. I lived kind of at the base of the Smoky Mountains. We were hiking constantly. But now dogs in Tennessee, actually 1 to 2% are seropositive for Borrelia. Now, this is in contrast to a state like Connecticut that we know is endemic with Lyme disease, where as many as 10% of the dogs as of February 2023 are testing positive for Borrelia. So I think this is something and very interesting as we make comparisons across the country, because endemic versus emerging, we are seeing different trends. And as I mentioned, it is emerging and changing, and it has these areas where it may not have used to be. And there's some potential reasons for that. So, the ticks that carry Borrelia are also expanding. If we were to go out and collect ticks, we know that ticks infected with Borrelia are being found in states they didn't used to be found in. So sometimes these ticks will feed on a bird. And if these are migratory birds, they may be taking these little ticks as partners with them much longer distances than they ever would have been able to travel alone on those tiny little legs. We also know that white-tailed deer are a reservoir for the adults. So the adults really love those white-tailed deer as a host for their blood meal. And so they can help propagate many, many generations of ticks. And with reforestation of many areas, we're seeing more deer and, of course, those ticks. And then also, we know there's continued biogeographical changes across the globe. And in North America, we are seeing ticks in areas that didn't used to see ticks. And unfortunately, they bring their pathogens with them. And then we also can see a difference in how humans are interacting with nature. I know during the COVID-19 pandemic, a lot of people left cities. And so we're seeing quite a suburban sprawl of people living in closer contact with maybe some of these tick environments or tick reservoir hosts. So, all potential things that could be allowing this growth of Lyme disease. So this is a very short video taken by Dr. Mike Dryden, and this is a female Ixodes species questing. In the northeastern side of the country, pretty much in the whole eastern side of the country, the tick Ixodes scapularis is the primary tick vector, whereas in the western United States, it is Ixodes pacificus that's the primary vector for Borrelia. Now, this tick that you saw, she had that first pair of legs out because she was questing for a host. So she has an organ at the end of that first pair of legs called Haller's organs, and it allows her to detect changes in carbon dioxide and other things. So as Dr. Dryden was getting very close to this twig, she sensed his presence and put that pair of legs out questing to see if she could grab a hold of him. So, if she did happen to grab a hold of him, she would take a blood meal, mate with a male partner, and then fall off into the environment to lay her eggs. Now, I consider ourselves lucky because Borrelia burgdorferi does not transmit from the mother to the eggs or larva stage. So, that is a period where we kind of get to start fresh with ticks that aren't infected. Now, when these larvae hatch, they will pretty quickly, usually in the spring or summer, find a small mammal host. Now, these small mammal hosts, particularly the white-footed mouse in the eastern side of the country, northeastern, or gray squirrels in the western US, are reservoirs for the Borrelia bacteria. And so when that larva feeds on these Borrelia reservoirs, they can pick up that bacteria, take in that blood meal that's required, drop into the environment, and molt to a nymph. Now, as a nymph, they're now infected, and they can go and transmit uninfected reservoir hosts so that we can propagate that reservoir in the small mammals, or they may go and actually feed on a dog or a person or another host. Now, nymphs are teeny tiny. CDC kind of released a hilarious photo of a poppy seed muffin, and they had some immature tick stages on that muffin, and it was very difficult to tell the difference between a poppy seed and a nymphal or larval tick. So these are what we might consider some of the most dangerous ticks to have on us because they may be infected with these Borrelia organisms and we don't know that they're there. Now, it does take 24 to 36 hours to transmit these pathogens, so we do have a little time to find them. But in a long coated dog or a very tiny tick, it is very often that they can transmit that organism and we never know. So after that nymph takes a blood meal, they typically overwintering. So this whole cycle can take up to 2 years, with our immature stages being out more in spring and summer. But the adults really do prefer the colder temperatures in the fall, early winter, and very early spring. And so that's when we would typically see those infected adults out trying to find a host and maybe transmitting this Borrelia. So by the time they're adults, they've had at least two opportunities to get infected with the Borrelia. And some recent research has showed, honestly, probably over the last 5 years, this research has showed the Borrelia actually is beneficial. It helps these ticks survive and have greater mobility. There was a study that showed nymphs that were infected with Borrelia were more mobile and they were more likely to be vertically mobile to get on that twig, on that blade of grass to try to find a host in comparison to control ticks that weren't infected. So this relationship with Borrelia and Ixodes species, it's a long relationship and they have definitely learned how to maximize that and how to transmit those pathogens. Now, Borrelia itself is an extremely interesting bacteria. It's a spirochete, so it is that spiral shaped, which helps with its motility, but it's also incredible in that it has all of these different outer surface proteins that it will coat itself with. In the US, we know there's at least 30 of these different outer surface proteins, but I'll be honest, there's probably a ton that we don't even know about yet. So there's a few very notable outer surface proteins, and that would be OSPA, OSPC, OSPF, and VLSE. And they're notable because they're maybe used in vaccines or in diagnostics. So in the tick, while they're in that midgut, they're mostly Borrelia is expressing OSPA. And a lot of people like to call this the anchor or adhere protein. So it really does allow that Borrelia to stay anchored in that tick. Now, when that tick gets on a mammalian host, even just the skin contact on that mammalian host, it's warm enough to signal to that Borrelia that, hey, I think I want to go find a new friend in a new host. And so it's going to start upregulating expression of OSC protein so it can coat itself in this protein, which stands for the cruise protein, that allows it to leave the midgut, cross the gut epithelium, go into the hemolymph and up to the salivary glands, and then eventually out into that other host. So again, can take 24 to 36 hours, sometimes more, to get that organism out and to that mammalian host. OSPA and OSC are really helpful to know about because when you're considering what type of vaccines you may want to pick to prevent these pets in endemic areas, OSPA is great when we make antibodies against this because while the tick is initially feeding, if it ingests those anti-OSPA antibodies, we can start killing the Borrelia before it may even leave the tick. Now, those that do make it into that mammalian host, then having anti-OSPC antibodies can help attack it once it's present. Now, both of these proteins do get downregulated once they're in that mammalian host, and we see more of the OSPF and the VLSE, which will be helpful when we're looking at diagnostics. So just as a schematic to kind of cement what I've said, those OSPA and OSC are going to be expressed early, and we may see antibodies to those early. Luckily for us as well, they named a lot of these alphabetically, and that helps me with the chronicity of when they would be present or not. But later on, that VLSE protein will be the predominant outer surface protein, and it has a ton of regions on it. C6 is one of the most dominant regions. It's invariable. It's typically always there. And so that's what we're definitely going to start seeing in dogs once they've been infected with that Borrelia. And it really does stay up as long as that Borrelia is there. OSPF is going to come out much later, and it may help us in diagnostic potentially with more chronic infections. You'll also see here that we can detect antibodies to C6 before clinical signs may even happen. And when we get to some of the clinical signs, you'll understand why we often will detect it way before we ever see signs. So in dogs, I would say 90 to 95% look just like that little pup there, smiling, bright, alert, responsive. They typically show no signs or subclinical if even when they're seropositive. Now in 5 to 10% of dogs, we will see some of these classic Lyme disease signs. Now, it's important to realize that these signs we're seeing is a consequence of the body's reaction to the infection, not the Borrelia causing this directly. So we'll see a fever, a shifting leg lameness. Fun fact, typically the first leg you'll start to see any sort of lameness in is probably the leg closest to where that tick was feeding. And that's where they're seeing the reaction first. But typically it starts shifting to multiple legs as we start seeing a more systemic immune reaction. Along with that, some joint swelling, maybe enlarged lymph nodes, and then just overall, they're not feeling great, not eating as well, and they may be a bit lethargic. There's also been a couple studies that have shown younger puppies are more likely to show clinical signs of Lyme disease than older puppies. So definitely if you see a younger dog coming in that's not on tick prevention, it's not vaccinated for Lyme, lives in a Lyme endemic area, and it's showing these signs, Lyme disease would definitely be up on high on your differential list. Now, besides the joint issues or disease that it may cause, Borrelia does predispose and loves the connective tissue. So some of these other organs where we may see issues are kidneys. So it may develop a Lyme nephritis over time, typically because of the immune response it's creating, these immune complexes that then lodge in there and can cause disease. I will say that it is rather rare. Only 2% or less of dogs that will develop Lyme nephritis in their life. And then there's also some smaller reports, more rare reports of potentially having infections in the meninges or the epicardium that may lead to a neuroborreliosis or some sort of myositis. Though, again, if you're not living in a Lyme endemic area and they're not having those other clinical signs associated with Lyme, it wouldn't be as high on a differential if you're seeing heart or brain involvement. So, diagnostics for sure, serology is going to be one of the most important. It's a great indicator of an infection because they're mounting a response. But besides serology, we really need to take in these other things to help you get a full picture of what's going on. So, if they have any clinical signs of Lyme disease, so that shifting leg lameness, the fever, along with the seropositivity, that's going to increase your suspicion that it truly is Lyme borreliosis in this dog. You also can rule out other causes for lameness or Lyme nephritis or nephritis in general, typically glomerulonephritis. And if you rule those type of things out and you still are left with the Borrelia, that can raise your suspicion as that's the true cause. And response to treatment, if they're showing clinical signs and they're seropositive, and you decide to go ahead with the antibiotics such as doxycycline, if Borrelia is the true cause, you'll typically see resolution in 1 to 2 days, which is really great. Now, if you don't see resolutions, that's maybe when you want to go back to the drawing board and try to work up some other possibilities. And besides just diagnosing a sick dog, there are many other reasons why we might want to test. First, just understanding what this dog is being infected or exposed to is quite advantageous. It gives us a lot of information about the environment that that pet lives. Lyme disease is zoonotic, and so if we can have information about our pets as sentinels for tick-borne diseases, we can learn about what we may be at risk as well. CDC actually had a study that if seroprevalence in dogs went above 5%, people are actually at a greater risk of contracting Lyme as well from those ticks in the environment. Knowing what the seropositivity in a dog, it also allows us to maybe make recommendations for vaccines. Currently, Lyme vaccines are considered lifestyle, so it's up to the veterinarian's decision based on where that dog lives. And if they are coming back seropositive, you know for sure they've been infected with a Borrelia, and you may want to move up that Lyme vaccine from a lifestyle to what you may consider a core in your practice. A lot of these tests also test for other vector-borne diseases such as Ehrlichia, Anaplasma, and heartworm, and having information on all of those diseases is also very helpful. So we're not just testing for Lyme in a lot of the cases. When we get any sort of diagnostic result, it's a wonderful opportunity for client education. When we get results back, it gives us a lot more evidence for why we're recommending tick prevention year round, why we show them how to properly check their pets for ticks, what they may be able to do to their backyard to decrease ticks, like cut their grass really short or create a barrier between the woods and their yards to prevent ticks from getting there, or why we recommend a vaccine. I think whenever you get that blue dot or red line, you have objective data now saying that this dog has ticks that feed on it. And this is why we need to start talking about all of these other things to help protect your pet. I also think when you test that this can be a time for you to assess what tick control recommendations you make. A lot of people think of ticks as just out in the summer. Well, in North America, like I said, exotic species can be out year round depending on the stage. And so if recommendations for tick control is only happening in the summer and you're getting a lot of new dogs seroconverting, you may really want to consider recommending that tick control year round because the risk is most definitely year round. And what are these tests screening for? So, the majority of the ones we use, the most popular ones, the ones that we all have in clinic, are looking at a portion of this VLSC protein. So, if you recall, that's one of those outer surface proteins that Borrelia uses to hide from the immune system. They're constantly changing what portions of VLSE they're expressing and coating themselves with. Now, C6 is one of those. The Borrelia does have to be in the host for at least 7 days before we're going to start detecting this protein, and then another few weeks before antibodies can be developed. But C6 is one of those they express typically all the time, which is great because it can allow us to identify that, especially when the host creates antibodies to those. And because VLSE is not currently used in any of the vaccines in North America, it also allows us to differentiate between a natural infection from the tick and whether or not that was Lyme vaccination causing any sort of antibody response. Some of the older diagnostics worked in OSP-A or OSP-C, but since those are often components of vaccines, it caused a lot of confusion to understand if this was from a vaccine or from the natural exposure. So I really love that a lot of the diagnostics we currently use picked a region that's not in vaccines. So, really quickly to wrap up before we go to the case, these are some of the things from the ACVIM consensus statement that they made sure to call out. So, all of the panelists recommended annual screening for tick-borne diseases in endemic areas. They also all recommended tick control. That is truly the vector of these diseases. And if we have really great compliance with those tick control products, we can greatly decrease the chance of tick-borne infections. We can't completely eliminate it, but we can decrease that risk considerably. That environmental control is something we should all consider. I think of Ixodes ticks as those deep wood ticks. They really love the woods, that thick leaf litter to kind of hide out when it's the hot part of the day. So if we clean that up, get rid of a lot of that, exclude wildlife, we may be able to potentially limit some of those ticks coming in close contact with our pets in our backyard. And then tick preventives are definitely a mainstay, and they all recommended that they need to be on something, especially something that has a quick speed of kill, that initial onset of kill, so that we can hopefully kill those ticks before they ever have the chance to transmit pathogens. Another important thing they talk about is proper tick removal. So you really should not twist or bend or use a lighter or Vaseline or nail polish. You should not use those methods, because when you manipulate the tick in that way before you remove it, you can actually cause them to regurgitate further, and they may be transmitting pathogens that they wouldn't have if you instead you grab as close to the skin as possible and pull steadily directly backwards. And then vaccination is something that you can definitely consider in these cases as well. Okay, so we're moving to Hannah, who is our case. She is an 11-year-old spayed female. She presented to her veterinarian for vaccines and an exam. She lives in New York, and she does have a history of hip dysplasia. On physical, there's evidence of dental disease. And she also, on the day of exam, had decreased range of motion, and she had pain when her hip joint was extended. Now, we know she has a history of that hip dysplasia, but she does live in a Lyme endemic area. And so we do want to go ahead and do that annual screening as recommended from the ACVIM panel. But the big question is, what diagnostic should we use? There's a lot out there, and it may be as simple as what do you have on your shelf, but there's some things you should consider when you pick a diagnostic. So, as an initial screening diagnostic, those top three are one of more of the historical screenings we may used to do. But again, they can't differentiate between a vaccine response and natural exposure. So they're not recommended. And honestly, there's not many on the market anymore. So it may not even be a possibility for you. So the other options we have, they all have their pros and cons. Of course, the Snap 40X Plus, as well as the VetScan Flex 4, which is now owned by Zoetis, are great because you can have those in your clinic. You do them right when you see the patient, and you can have results and recommendations all in the same day. Those two tests, as well as the Acuplex 4, are going to add in other vector-borne diseases. So heartworm antigen, and then antibodies to Ehrlichia and Anaplasma, all important diseases of dogs, and definitely great information to have. Now, some of them can also give us quantitative data, but you do have to send those off to the laboratory. And that quantitative data, such as the Quant C6 and the multiplex, can give us information about the titer level or the magnitude of that antibody response in those dogs. And just remember too, some of these diagnostics that are detecting antibodies to OSPA and OSPC should be interpreted in light of vaccine status. So if a dog is vaccinated, they probably do have antibodies to OSPA and OSC, and so you would want to consider that when you look at those results for those tests. So in Hannah's case, it was decided to do that 4DX SNAP, which includes that heartworm antigen as well. And they also did some senior blood work, a KIM panel, CBC, a thyroid panel, as well as a UA. So for Hannah, she was only positive on that SNAP 4 Lyme disease. So she currently has circulating antibodies to Borrelia, and her workup otherwise was within normal limits. So we're in an interesting situation where she may have clinical signs, but the signs we saw in her hip may be due to her hip dysplasia. So there's some things we can consider next, such as a Lyme Quant C6, which again is giving you a titer or a magnitude of those antibodies that we detected on that 4DX. Now, it is considered controversial of whether it's required and not. And typically, I recommend this is up to you as a clinician. I'm not one to ever turn down information, but it may be able to give you, as you track progression, or if you decide to treat this dog, can see resolution. So there's reasons to do it, but many don't believe that it's required or that it'll give you more information as you move forward. So this is just a schematic that I think really helps you consider all your options as you're working through these dogs that are Lyme positive, seropositive. The consensus statement all agree that you need to initiate tick control. Again, you have that objective data of that blue dot or red line that is telling you this dog has ticks feeding on it, and they've been feeding long enough to even transmit Borrelia. This panel also recommends that any Lyme positive test result should be followed with testing for proteinuria, because Lyme nephritis is a very serious sequela of Lyme infection, Lyme disease, and we would definitely want to create a management plan for that animal that is proteinuric. So if you do these tests and the dog is not proteinuric, you may consider testing with the Quant C6 to give yourself a little bit more information of whether or not you want to treat. Now, I'm going to be honest and tell you that not everybody thinks you need this information, but like I said, it can definitely help you in your decision-making process if you kind of like to follow some sort of algorithm. So if you were to run that and it was greater than 30 units per mil, you may consider treating with doxycycline, and you would definitely want to consider Lyme vaccination, because obviously this dog has been infected with Borrelia and it's likely to be infected again. Now, if that result is less than 30 units per mil, you may consider not treating and just monitoring that dog, but again, considering strongly that vaccination to protect that dog further. Regardless of the results of the Quant C6, or regardless if you decide to run that or not, and the dog's not proteinuric, the ACVIM panel does recommend that you continually monitor that proteinuria, at least 6 months, maybe yearly, on a yearly basis, so that you can track this and make sure that we catch any of those Lyme nephritis cases if they were happening. If you did Quant C6 test, it would be good to be able to have serial testing results from that, so we could potentially see any sort of relapse or reinfection and intervene more aggressively if needed, or treat again if that's what you decide to do. Now, if when you were testing for that proteinuria, if the dog was indeed proteinuric, you would definitely want to complete your exam as much as you can and consider that Quant C6 again to see if you have more evidence to sway you to believe this proteinuria is due to Lyme disease. There are many other parasites that may lead to proteinuria, and you can rule those out as well. And in these cases with proteinuria and seropositive, you definitely want to initiate treatment with that doxycycline and consider just monitoring that proteinuria in these cases long term. So in Hannah's case, we were happy to see that her Quant C6 was less than 30, she had no proteinuria, and she had normal kidney values. So what this leads us to now have to consider is, what do we do with these clinically healthy seropositive dogs? If we Should we treat, should we not? Again, in Hannah's case, she had some joint abnormalities, but was it due to the hip dysplasia, or was it because of Lyme disease? So this is definitely something that I believe probably a lot of clinicians have to deal with and think about every day. So with the ACVIM statement, they were split on whether they should treat this group of dogs or not. So I'm going to go over some of the pros and some of the cons. So the ones that believe they should initiate treatment is that they believe treatment, so clearance of that Borrelia and therefore lessen of immune response and antibodies produced, may decrease circulating immune complexes that would occur if we had a high antibody load potentially, and that may then lodge into organs and cause issues later on. They also believe that treatment may decrease the antibody titer in general, because again, you're clearing those borrelial organisms. But we know Borrelia may hide in tissues away, and so then our immune system can't find them to create antibodies. So are we potentially having a false sense of security with this? Who knows? Co-infections are also very common. So Ixodes species that transmit Borrelia burgdorferi in the United States, they also transmit Anaplasma phagocytophilum. And so very often we'll see animals infected with both. And there's a lot of overlapping in those vague kind of common signs. And luckily the treatment for both is the same. And so when you have both, you may be more likely to see clinical signs, and treatment may help resolve that as well. Now, this camp also believed that it may be good to then use the Quant C6 to help you decide of whether or not if you want to go as that algorithm had showed you. Now, for the group that believes if you do decide to go ahead with treatment, again, doxycycline at that 10 mg per kg for 30 days is the treatment of choice. But as you can see, there's quite a few options, and this table is directly from that consensus statement. Now, those that believe we should not be treating think that there's no data to support that treatment is going to decrease the risk of illness. They don't believe that the treatment will clear all of the Borrelia from the tissues. Reinfection is really common. So then you have to decide, am I going to continually keep treating or not? And then, of course, whenever we're using antibiotics, we want to be good stewards of those. And so we want to avoid selecting for resistance or adverse reactions. But regardless of the pros or the cons, they all agreed that if proteinuria is present, it demands treatment attention and continued monitoring. So to wrap up and finish, Lyme disease risk is increasing in North America. It's in regions that we didn't expect initially, but these ticks are moving, and so we're seeing the Lyme move with it. I understand that diagnosis and treatment can be challenging and confusing and complicated, so definitely stay up to date on all of the consensus statement and the research. And prevention is truly key. Looking for ticks, removing ticks, annually testing for tick-borne diseases, recommending that year-round tick control, showing proper tick removal, and then even adding in that vaccination are all things that we can do to help prevent, which is so great. We have all of that to recommend. Very quickly, I want to share a success story. There's a paper that showed they were comparing seroprevalence trends in endemic versus emerging areas. And in a state like New Jersey, where Lyme disease has been present for quite a while, they're actually seeing a small decrease in seroprevalence in dogs. And one of the main reasons they believe that's happening is because we've got so good at recommending year-round tick control and vaccination. So all I say is keep up the good work, keep recommending that, and hopefully we can show Lyme disease that we're the boss on this. If you have any questions at all, feel free to email me. I may not always have the answer to everything, but I definitely will find you someone that can answer your question.
Awesome, Dr. Duncan. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. I love the video of like the female tick going like this. And that's how I feel when I'm hunting for morel mushrooms in Minnesota, where we are tick infested. So I love hearing the positive news about the potential where, with appropriate flea and tick fast kill medication, with, using CDC recommended guidelines like just being able to rearrange your backyard and creating some separation. And vaccination, all great stuff. I also advocate for backyard chickens because they eat a ton of ticks. So when in doubt, you should get backyard chickens.
Love
All
it.
right. So let's go ahead and open the floor to a couple of questions that I see out there. The first one is when it comes to checking for proteinuria, do you use or recommend a urine dipstick or checking for microalbuminuria? I will say I personally think the urine dipstick is highly undervalued, and it's so inexpensive, but would love to hear your thoughts on it.
I completely agree. It's a great thing to have on your shelf. You can get that pretty easily. You can also screen for a lot of different things all in one test. And then if you see results that you're concerned about, then you can order more testing or more extensive testing. So definitely that dipstick, in my opinion, as well is a very great tool to have in every clinic.
Awesome. And before I forget, I just wanted to remind everyone, please make sure to fill out the form. Though when you fill that out, we'll make sure to, and you want to fill it out with your email address associated with your VETgirl account. If you don't have a VETgirl account, you want to sign up for a free one. So make sure to go ahead and do that. And I'll drop that in the chat right now. So again, please make sure to fill out that form right away, because we're going to close that off in about 20-30 minutes. All right. Another question that I'm seeing is what about Quant C6? It can be controversial. And what do you think in terms of antimicrobial stewardship and how to interpret it?
That's a really great question, and I don't know if anybody if you were to get a large group of veterinarians together, I don't know if they would walk out with a single answer. So, like I said, if that is something that you really feel helps you make a decision, especially if it's the first time you're seeing that patient or it's the first time they've seroconverted and you want to use that test to help you decide and then track, it's something that you could consider. But we definitely have to be more aware of how we use our antibiotics. And so if you live in endemic areas where theoretically you may have to treat every dog that comes into your clinic, that's just not realistic and not something that we can do. And so I think doing some of the other blood work is really important. Obviously, testing for proteinuria, keep monitoring these dogs for these antibodies, especially for other tick-borne diseases, because I'll say if they come up positive for anaplasma or Ehrlichia as well, that would be a dog I would consider using doxycycline really important, even if they've been having antibodies for Borrelia for many years, because we know with co-infections, they're more likely to have clinical signs. And we would love to be able to treat those dogs that are going to have diseases. So probably not a perfect, straight, clear answer, but I do think that where you practice, it's something that you should consider for more information, but don't feel like it's something that's required at all.
Thank you. Great answer. I will agree. And for those of you guys, I don't know if you know, but the ACVM consensus statement on Lyme disease was published several years ago, and it's got some great information. Remember, the ACVM consensus statements are totally free, so I recommend downloading that. I also put in a Quant C6 flowchart just in the notes. I personally don't run them a lot, and I live in the heart of Lyme Central in Minnesota. And I'm seeing a couple of great questions. We're not going to be able to get through all of them because I want everyone to stay within the time frame, because I know you guys are all busy. But I will say we all see a lot of blue dots, right? But whether or not the dot is for Lyme versus anaplasma or whatever. And I'm seeing some questions on, like, how do you convince an owner to vaccinate for Lyme or on top of preventative? And I think the biggest thing is why we often get frustrated with some of the SNAP tests, because it changes our spiel of what we have to say to an owner, like instead of just saying, "Oh, your dog's heartworm negative, but they're also positive for Lyme." I think the key thing is awareness of exposure, right? It is true exposure, and it means that somehow tick prevention has failed. So they need to make sure to implement not just one, but all methods or modalities. So, making sure they're feeling for ticks every day. They're screening the pet appropriately. They're changing their backyard if possible. They're making sure to protect themselves with Lyme vaccines, or making sure that they are on a fast kill oral flea and tick medication. So again, even though we get frustrated with that, please be aware that blue dot is helpful, and it shows us failure by the pet owner. And, we really need to encourage them to be better tick stewards, I would say. All right.
Definitely. Definitely.
All right. One other question that I wanted to ask before we end it. Do you know if there is any resistance to doxycycline? And part two, thoughts on vaccinating a Lyme positive proteinuric dog?
So when it comes to resistance to doxycycline, I'm assuming resistance to the Borrelia. is the question. So this is really hard to answer. I think there would have to be a lot of experimental infections to truly confirm this, because Borrelia can hide out in tissues. And so if there is a true relapse, you don't know if it's because they were hiding and they reemerged, or if it was a true failure of that antibiotic. So I think as we hear, honestly, more information from you guys from the field of having any sort of treatment or suspected treatment failures, that's where researchers go in and they try to set up experience to then be able to give back to the field that information. For the second part of the question, which was, remind me, what was that about?
Oh, no problem. Any thoughts on vaccinating a Lyme positive proteinuric dog?
So currently, it is not recommended to vaccinate proteinuric dogs. So typically, they're having proteinuria because there's those leaky glomeruli, and those immune complexes are often a cause of that. Now, if you were to vaccinate a dog with any vaccine, honestly, and you induce a higher circulating antibody load, you actually may increase those immune complexes and could further damage those kidneys. So not recommended to vaccinate proteinuric dogs.
Wonderful. Remember, we only want to use vaccination in completely healthy pets. So keep that in mind. With that, Dr. Duncan, I just want to thank you so much. I want to thank all of you guys who are out there learning on YouTube with us tonight, and really appreciate all that you do. And just thankful again for all that you do in the parasitology world. So thanks for tonight's webinar. And again, a huge shout out to Merck Animal Health for being able to provide this YouTube Live free to everybody. And again, this is your last warning to fill out that form, which I'm going to put in the notes one more time so you can get your CE certificate. Again, make sure to register with your email address associated with your VETgirl account, and it will be found in your My Credits. And with that, I hope everyone has an amazing night.
Thanks,
Good night,
guys.
everyone.
Thank you.